The air was thick. Inside the marble-clad Summit Hall in Geneva, the cameras were rolling, the lights were hot, and every seat was filled with tension. Trump leaned back, arms crossed, a confident grin playing on his face. "Captain Traoré," he said, voice booming through the microphone, "America is ready to invest. A multi-billion-dollar partnership. Roads, airports, tech, all yours. All you have to do is open the doors." The hall clapped politely. But Traoré didn't. He sat still, straight-backed, unblinking. His fingers intertwined tightly on the table, as if holding something back. To the outside world, it sounded like a generous offer. But to him, it was something else entirely. Something he had seen before. Promises dressed in chains. Help packaged in control. The crowd waited. He slowly turned his head, locked eyes with Trump, and leaned closer to the mic. "I don't need you." A murmur ran through the room. Journalists dropped their pens. Presidents whispered in disbelief. Africa doesn't need handcuffs disguised as help. And just like that, history shifted. But this wasn't just about politics. It was personal. 20 years earlier. A dusty village in northern Burkina Faso. A young Ibrahim sat barefoot under a baobab tree, watching his mother boil rice over a fire made of sticks. The radio played softly. Foreign voices speaking promises his family had heard all their lives: aid, support, development. But nothing ever changed. His school had no roof. His father's farm had no water. His village had no doctor. One night, an American delegation flew in. SUVs, suits, smiles. They spoke of partnership. But they didn't speak Moray, the local language. They handed out brochures and left with photos. 3 months later, they returned with bulldozers. They dug up land they didn't own. They mined gold, promised jobs, and gave none. They left behind torn earth and silence. Ibrahim never forgot. He was only 15 when his uncle died from a fever that clean water could have cured. That night, he cried for the first time in years, not because of the death, but because he realized Africa wasn't poor. It was being drained. And now, 2 decades later, the same empire had returned, with newer words and bigger cameras. But Traoré was no longer a boy. He was ready. The room was still frozen. Trump blinked, slowly, then smiled. "Ibrahim," he said, trying to soften his voice. "Don't misunderstand. We only want to help. You've got big dreams. We've got the money." The crowd chuckled nervously. But Traoré wasn't smiling. He looked past Trump, past the marble walls, past the applause. And in that split second, his eyes traveled to the gallery, where an African woman sat holding her child, wrapped in kente cloth. She looked just like his mother had once looked, tired, proud, unseen. He turned back to the mic. "You had your chance," he said. 60 years of help, and what did Africa get? Debt, dictators, disrespect. The silence grew deeper. World leaders looked away. Some shifted uncomfortably, others whispered to aides. But millions watching online leaned closer to their screens, because this wasn't just a soundbite. It was a wound finally speaking. Trump leaned back, taken off guard. But Traoré wasn't done. "I'm not here to beg. I'm not here to sell my people for promises wrapped in lies." Outside, protesters erupted in cheers. Online, the video went viral. In Africa, people cried because finally, someone was saying what needed to be said. After Traoré's words, the atmosphere inside the summit collapsed. It wasn't just quiet. It was icy. A senior European diplomat cleared his throat. Another from Asia adjusted his earpiece, pretending not to hear what had just shaken the room. A few African presidents looked down. Embarrassed or exposed? Only one man remained still: Traoré. He wasn't here to win a handshake. He wasn't here for applause. He was here for truth. Trump leaned toward his mic again, but this time, There was no smile. "You're young. I understand. You don't see the whole picture yet," he said, trying to sound like a father giving advice. Traoré chuckled. It was soft, but it cut. "No, Mr. Trump," he said. "I've seen enough pictures. Ones of children mining your phone batteries, of women crying over land taken for your profit, of leaders bought, not elected." Cameras panned across the room, some shocked, some nodding quietly. "Africa doesn't need lectures," he said. "We need to be left alone to heal." And in that moment, the crowd wasn't looking at a soldier anymore. They were looking at a man, scarred, honest, and dangerous. Dangerous because he had nothing left to fear. Back home in Ouagadougou, the streets were flooded, not with cars, but with people, young, old, poor, rich. They gathered around screens in shops, cafes, homes, all watching, all waiting. When Traoré said, "We need to be left alone to heal," an old woman sitting in a market stall whispered, "That's my son speaking." She wasn't his mother, but she could have been. Because in every market, every home, every worn-down clinic, Ibrahim Traoré was a reflection of their pain, their silence, their years of being ignored. In the presidential palace, one of Traoré's advisors walked into his office after the summit. "You said it," the advisor said, voice trembling. "You finally said what all of us have buried for generations." Traoré didn't speak. He turned away from the cameras, stepped into the side room, and sat down alone. And then, something broke. A single tear ran down his cheek. Not from weakness. From the weight of every mother who lost a son in a war they didn't start. From the screams of children buried under mines laid for foreign gold. From the centuries of pretending things were fine. This wasn't politics anymore. It was personal. By the next morning, the internet had exploded. Where Traoré was trending in 92 countries. TikTok flooded with remixes of his speech. A Senegalese rapper dropped a verse overnight. "I don't need your aid, I need my peace. My roots run deep, let colonizers cease." In South Africa, students marched with signs, "No more handcuffs disguised as help. Our pain, our voice, our Traoré." But not everyone was celebrating. In Washington, D.C., media outlets called him unstable. A Fox News host asked, why would he reject billions of dollars? In Paris, a leaked document showed officials scrambling to reassess their African strategies. But Traoré, he stayed silent. He didn't reply. He didn't post. Instead, he visited a children's hospital in Bobo Dioulasso. No press, no fanfare. A little girl with burned scars whispered, "Are you the man on TV?" He knelt down. "I am, but more importantly, I'm your brother." Her eyes widened. She smiled, a smile missing 2 front teeth but filled with hope. That's when his bodyguard said, "Sir, there's been a response from Trump's office." Traoré stood. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The message arrived at dawn. An American diplomat, flanked by private security, handed Traoré a sealed envelope. The writing was bold, unmistakable. From the desk of Donald J. Trump. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Captain Traoré, you made your point. But the world doesn't move on ideals. It moves on deals. America is still willing to make this work. A new proposal, bigger, faster, more control over development. All you have to do is step aside. A brighter future for you, your people, and your legacy. Think wisely." Below it was a number, $12.6 billion. Traoré sat quietly. He handed the letter to his advisor without a word. Outside, the children's hospital was waking up. A nurse sang softly as she cleaned a boy's wounds. A mother prayed by her daughter's bedside. And suddenly that number meant nothing. Because what price do you place on dignity? "They still think I'm for sale," he said. His advisor looked up. "So what now?" Traoré stood slowly. Now, he said, we show them what a free Africa looks like. And in that instant, a decision was made. One that would change everything. News leaked. The counteroffer, the money, the condition. Within hours, protests erupted in capital cities across West Africa. Not against Traoré, but against corruption, betrayal, and silence. For too long, leaders had accepted offers like Trump's. And their people? Left with broken roads and empty promises. In Niger, a teenager painted "Africa is not for sale" across a military wall. In Ghana, church choirs turned their hymns into chants of, "We don't need you." Then the tremor came, not of the earth, but of history cracking. Dozens of African journalists, many once silent, went live online. For decades, we've been told to stay quiet, to protect our aid, our stability. But Traoré has reminded us, stability built on chains is still slavery. The video hit 11 million views in 3 hours. That night, a mother in Kinshasa told her son, "One day they'll write songs about this week, you watch." And the boy replied, "No, Mama, they'll write books." But the story wasn't over. At the UN, a surprise meeting was called. A Western leader stepped forward with a threat. The world wasn't just watching anymore. It was choosing sides. The night before the UN meeting, Traoré received a phone call. It was from an old voice, one he hadn't heard in over a decade. "Captain," the voice said, cracking with age and pain, "it's Mustafa, from the old camp." Traoré's heart stopped. Mustafa had once been a soldier under him. But more than that, he was his childhood friend. The one who used to share a single plate of rice with him after school. The one who disappeared years ago after a US-backed regime change in Mali. "Mustafa, you're alive?" There was silence. "I've been hiding," the voice said. "I saw what you did, what you said to Trump. I cried, man. I wept like a boy, because someone finally said it, for all of us buried and forgotten." Traoré clenched his fist. "I need you to know," Mustafa continued. "They're planning something. They can't afford a free Africa. Be careful." Traoré's voice dropped. "Let them come." And for the first time since the speech, he was scared, not of death, but of what his people would suffer if he failed. Outside his window, the city lights twinkled, but above them, the storm was gathering. The United Nations hall buzzed with electricity. Every delegate had watched the video. Every ear had heard Traoré's words. Now they came, not for peace, but for power. When Traoré entered, the cameras zoomed in. He walked slowly, his green uniform crisp, eyes calm, but burning. Trump was already there. Alongside him, leaders from France, the UK, and a few African heads of state, the ones comfortable in chains. A UN official stood. "We are here to discuss the future of West Africa." Trump leaned in. "Your future depends on cooperation," he said quietly. Traoré stared straight ahead, then responded, not just for Trump, but for every camera, every poor village, every child watching. "My future depends on my people, not your signature." Murmurs, then silence. One delegate from a small African island stood and clapped, then another and another. But not everyone applauded. An emergency motion was drafted, a resolution to sanction Burkina Faso for disruptive leadership. It passed. Traoré didn't blink. "Let the chains fall where they may," he whispered. Outside, African youths protested in front of foreign embassies. This wasn't just a political storm now. It was a revolution. That night, Traoré sat alone at his desk. He hadn't slept in 48 hours. His aides begged him to rest, but he couldn't, because the betrayal didn't come from across the ocean. It came from within. His intelligence chief slid a folder across the table. Inside, evidence, phone records, bank transfers, leaked emails. One of Traoré's own ministers, a man he had once shared bread with, had been feeding information to foreign powers. Details about military bases, oil reserves, even Traoré's travel routes. The goal, remove him, not with war, but with a plane crash. "Sir," the intelligence chief said, voice tight, "they're planning to make it look like an accident, and they want it done before the month ends." Traoré looked out the window. Rain tapped the glass. Thunder rolled over Ouagadougou like a warning drum. "So even my brothers have a price," he said softly. He didn't cry. He didn't flinch. "Let them come," he said again. "But this time, I'll be ready. Because if he died, it would be as a man who stood tall. But he wasn't done yet, not by a long shot." It arrived in the morning. A handwritten letter in shaky ink folded into a cloth pouch, delivered by a barefoot boy who said only, "She told me to run, all the way here." It was from Traoré's mother, still living in the same small village, refusing to move to the city. "My son, you were born crying, and now the world cries with you. I see the people marching. I see the fire in their eyes. I'm proud, but I'm scared too. Not of your enemies, but of what this fight might steal from you. Don't let them turn your heart into stone. I didn't raise a lion to roar. I raised one to protect. Whatever happens, come home when it's over. And remember, Africa is more than politics. She is your grandmother's hands, your father's sweat, your people's songs. Love, Mama." He read it 3 times. Each word dug deeper than bullets. He folded it, placed it near his heart, and finally let the tears fall. Quiet and full of grief. Because what he was fighting for wasn't just history. It was home. The plane took off from Dakar under a diplomatic code. No questions asked, no inspections. On board, crates marked medical relief, but inside, equipment for a covert strike. The man in the last row didn't speak. Passport fake, eyes sharp, fingers twitching. A mercenary, paid in cryptocurrency, trained in silence. Target, Ibrahim Traoré. Objective, make it look like a mechanical failure. A tragic accident. Africa would mourn for a day. And then, business as usual. Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré's team intercepted whispers, but nothing concrete. Only coordinates, only a time. Midnight. The president was scheduled to give a late address. Outside, thousands of students filled the plaza, holding candles, waiting, singing. He stood behind the curtain, hands clasped. "Ibrahim," his aide whispered, "if you go out and they strike, they won't strike," he said. "But if they do?" He looked out at the crowd. "Then I die standing." The aide stepped back, speechless, because in that moment, Traoré wasn't just a man anymore. He was a symbol, and symbols don't hide. At 11:52 p.m., the assassin arrived. He was already inside the event perimeter, uniform disguised, ID forged, calm. The crowd chanted, "We are not for sale." Traoré stepped onto the podium. His voice echoed across the square. "They've tried to buy us, bury us, break us, but we are still here, standing, breathing, rising." Applause. The assassin raised a hand to his ear. Click. A signal confirmed. Go. But then, a girl screamed. Not because of the assassin, because of the sky. A plane was spinning. Smoke. Fire. It wasn't Traoré's. It was the assassin's own extraction plane, taken down by Burkinabe Air Command, tipped off minutes earlier by Mustafa. The assassin froze. 2 soldiers tackled him to the ground. His weapon clattered across the concrete. The crowd gasped, then erupted, not in fear but in fury. Traoré didn't flinch. He watched the flames in the sky, watched the betrayal fall from above, and said only, "Africa will never kneel again." The world was watching, and now it believed. The night of the failed assassination, Traoré didn't celebrate. There were no fireworks, No speeches. Just silence. He walked alone through the refugee camp outside the capital, where displaced families had fled conflict, drought, and terror long before the cameras came. Children followed him, quietly. A girl handed him a mango. "It's not much," she whispered. He knelt. "It's everything." They sat, around a fire. He asked their names, their stories. They told him about dead fathers, lost homes, and dreams stolen by war. And then, he asked them to pray. Not for him, but for the land. Pray for the rain to return, for the soil to remember, for our leaders to stop lying, for peace to grow where blood once fell. A boy, no older than 8, closed his eyes and said, "Dear God, protect the man who didn't sell us." Traoré's voice cracked. He had delivered speeches to the UN, to generals, to crowds of millions. But this broke him, because it wasn't applause, it wasn't power, it was hope, pure, small, unpaid, and it was enough to keep going. 2 weeks later, a final offer came, this time not from Trump. It came from a coalition of G8 nations, disguised in language smoother than silk. A global investment pact, infrastructure, education, peacekeeping assistance. In exchange, allow oversight, open resources, and step aside for a transitional team. They promised rebuilding, but Traoré had seen this script before. Rebuilding meant ownership. Oversight meant occupation. Transition meant removal. His cabinet begged him to consider. "At least negotiate," they said. But Traoré shook his head. "You don't negotiate your soul." That night he recorded a video. Alone. No script, no suit. Just his truth. "To those who come offering gold wrapped in chains, I say this. We are not your project. We are not your mistake to fix. We are Africa. And we are no longer afraid of standing alone." He paused, then added, "If I disappear, let it be known. I died on my feet." He sent the video to his media team and went to sleep with his boots on. The clip would break the internet by morning. They came from everywhere, on foot, on bikes, in trucks, from villages with no names and cities thick with smog. Senegal, Congo, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa. Millions. Young and old, Christian and Muslim, wearing flags, holding photos of ancestors, holding signs that read, "We don't need you." I am Traoré. Africa is enough. No violence, no chaos, just a march. An ocean of bodies moving through capital streets, holding candles and tears. In Ouagadougou, the national square overflowed. Cameras couldn't capture it all. Drones ran out of battery. The whole world tuned in, not out of curiosity, but conviction. Traoré stood on a balcony, watching in silence. His mother at his side. She said nothing, but her hand found his. He looked at her. She nodded. And for once, the weight on his shoulders didn't feel so heavy, because he wasn't carrying it alone anymore. Africa had finally found its voice, and it was millions strong. They called it the day Africa stood still, not for fear, but for pride. Traoré declined the final deal. No foreign oversight, no transitional puppet government, no compromise on freedom. Western leaders issued statements. Some offered veiled threats, others stayed silent. But it didn't matter anymore. Something irreversible had happened. A generation had awoken. In classrooms, teachers quoted Traoré. In music, his words became lyrics. In politics, young Africans entered government not to serve the West, but to serve their people. Traoré stood before his people one last time that year. No guards, no suits, just a brown tunic and worn boots. "I didn't come here to be liked," he said. "I came to break the chain." He paused, then smiled. "And now, you hold the key." The crowd cried. Some dropped to their knees, not in defeat, but in prayer, in honor. My brothers and sisters watching this right now, if this story moved you, if you felt even a spark of hope, of power, or tears in your eyes, don't scroll. Hit that like button to show the world you stand with Traoré. Drop a comment. I stand tall with Africa. And subscribe, because this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Let's build a family that tells the truth, that uplifts the voice of a continent that refuses to kneel. Let's light up this algorithm with the power of real stories.